Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural Ethical Gala here at the Conway Hall. Will you please give a massive round of applause, because she's actually speaking to you right now, your MC for this evening, or Master of Ceremonies, Iszi Lawrence!
There we go. Hello. How ethical are we feeling today? I'm looking around for the leather shoes. I've seen a few already. So bad ethics already. People up there too afraid to be with the hoi polloi down here. Hello there. Welcome to... It's one of these words, inaugural, which is quite difficult to say when you've actually sort of spent time looking at it backstage going, don't muck anything up. Inaugural Gala means first. It's the first one. It's the first. We could say. Also, it's in February, which is actually the hardest month to say, because it's got that R in there, which is difficult. I'm a bit obsessed with how things say. I should introduce myself before I start to introduce absolutely everybody else. I am Iszi Lawrence. No, I haven't heard of me either, but I'm important. Okay? Now, I am a national broadcaster. I was on the radio today. So, right? Proper BBC, none of this sort of like, LBC crap. No, actual, like, Radio 4. Yeah, exactly. Now your ears prick up. This is Conway Hall. You respect Radio 4. And you have to say, you can't say 4. They don't let you say, it's BBC Radio 4. 4. It's very important that you get that pronunciation. I can prove it. Hang on. I'll do the thing. Hang on. Hello and welcome to Making History on BBC Radio 4. I'm Iszi Lawrence and I know what you're doing, you dirty thing. Good. That's true. I present Making History. I also present the British Museum member cast, which is, I work for the British Museum and I do this little podcast, which is about the members' lectures, and I'm a bit of a child. So when they said, because you have to imagine the British Museum is exactly what you expect it to be. It is basically a lot of men with massive beards and a lot of women with far too many pens. That is the sort of level of sort of like, very, very, very intelligent people, but if you open the office fridge, it is full of people's handbags. Proper clever, very scatty. And I was in on so many meetings because they've already got a British Museum podcast and they wanted to know what to call this podcast, which was about the members' lectures. So they came up in their little meetings going, yep, this is the one. The British Museum member cast. Now, I sat in on so many meetings so quietly until they completed the artwork, where a point I said that, it did sound like a plaster cast penis. But so that is me. I'm a comedian, I do history programming, and I introduce people. Now, I was informed, which I've written on the back of my hand, unfortunately we've had 2 changes to tonight's bill, completely, last minute, which is unfortunate. So unfortunately, Nishka Shulka cannot make it, and nor can Catherine Mayer. They're very sorry that they cannot be here, but their thoughts are with you. And also with you. But we have got the fantastic Dr. Shola Mos-Shogbamimu. Already. I'm going to say this right, because we've been singing it backstage. Okay. Dr. Shola Mos-Shogbamimu, right? Who is awesome. So you're going to have your brain stretched. Are you ready to learn things? Skepticism. Are you ready to open your mind and have it expanded? Are you ready to have your moral compass shifted and toyed with by different things going on? It's a question I'm not sure about either. Well, here to explain why we're having this event and why the Conway Hall is associated with ethics. It's not just a cool, place. I know you're looking around going, surely this is where every cool kid in London wants to hang out. I mean, look at us, we're fly, right? But why Conway Hall is associated with ethics and with these moral decisions, I have the CEO of Conway Hall here, exactly, I love that. Could we just turn this into pantomime all evening? It'll be brilliant. Here to tell you more about this ethical gala. So I want you to go wild and crazy as you possibly can. I mean, seriously, it's a bit polite at the moment. So I want clapping, I want cheering, I want stomping of feet. I want as much noise as possible. The more noise you make, the more ethical you are. It is true. So will we please welcome to the stage, it's Jim Walsh!
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming as well. And thank you for the tech who's put the slideshow up. So I'm going to start with a collective existential question. Who are we? I'm going to talk about Conway Hall. That's the we. We have been described as a cathedral of secular culture and thought. We have been described in such words as I cannot imagine London without it. It's a shelter from the storm of life. Sanity, smartness, and kindness in a mad world. But actually, it's Conway Hall Ethical Society. The Ethical Society, we are the people who run Conway Hall. And this is our inaugural annual Ethical Gala. So what do we care about? What is important to Conway Hall Ethical Society? This next slide is a bit subtle. What are our values? So we value creative, diverse, historic, human, and kind. What is our history? I'm going to be brief, don't worry. Anna Walker spoke in 1829, nearly 200 years ago, about women being treated equally and educated equally, so girls and boys get education. Monsieur Conway, the building is named after, he helped his father's slaves escape to freedom in 1863 in the Civil War in the States. In the 1940s, trade unions met here with the Socialist Medical Association to say we need, and that made an argument for the National Health Service. We had anti-apartheid meetings in the 1950s. There was a campaign a national campaign for the abolition of capital punishment. Muddy Waters played here. These wonderful people worked in our library. So what are we doing now? We have location filming. We have exhibitions, concerts, talks, learning. We have festivals. And we have our partner program as well. And we also have a beehive on our roof. I'm here, though, because it's a gala, and it's our fundraising gala. I'm going to tell you how you can be involved. You can become a member. I think on the seats we should have membership flyers. The benefits: free entry to Thinking on Sunday talks and Thinking on Monday, cheaper entry to our Sunday concerts, and cheaper fees for our courses. You could make a donation. Or, nice slide, this one. Really help us to continue doing these things by helping us to improve these things. Some of you are sitting on them. Our heating system. This is our 1929 air conditioning unit. If you become, I think it's at the ambassador level, you get a behind-the-scenes tour with the CEO. You could see that. Our library, we need constant upgrading in obviously our Art Deco building and also our collections and need looking after. And so for the first time, you could become a supporter, a donor, an ambassador, a patron. All you have to do is follow the links on the flyer. That's what the flyer looks like. Hopefully everyone's seen them. And that will help us to secure our future so that we can keep doing all of this that you're about to witness tonight, but also all of these things, and have events like that happen at Conway Hall. Follow the links. Or talk to one of us at the end of the evening in the foyer. Thank you ever so much indeed.
Jim Walsh, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. You can talk to him, and that was a hard sell, wasn't it? Cool. I tell you what, though, you know how you have those people who have everything in your life? Get them a membership to a place like this, to a museum or whatever. It's a brilliant gift because they're something they definitely do not have, and also something they cannot pretend. They can't pretend. Oh yeah, I used that to do this. No, they can't because you can ask. And also, if you're paying for it, you can see how much money. Essentially, they'll send you emails and stuff like that. See how much money you saved, so you can stalk your relatives, possibly. Anyway, so we've got so many speakers this evening. Your first one, though, I have worked with many a time, for not only is she a founder and a director, she is also a comedian by trade. I normally do this thing when we're talking about women comics, and particularly when I first started, I used to have a joke, which I always used to say, which is, don't worry, I will not talk about women's issues, period. But it's one of these things. Flo, who is beautifully, that is her name, Florence, she definitely she's definitely eschewed all of that. She's really embraced everything about that, and not just in comedy. She's actually changing people's lives, which I'm sure she will tell you about in just a moment. So, without further ado, are you ready for your first proper speaker, who isn't Jim? Who is not going to try and get money off you? Are you ready? Good. Will you please give a big whooping cheer to the fantastic Florence Schechter? There she is. Have a great time.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see you all here. What a lovely turnout. I was asked to do a talk about something to do with ethics and vaginas, being the director of the Vagina Museum. I didn't realize this was a comedy show, so I'm going to rewrite this on the fly, see how many jokes I can fit in. It's going to be great. Also, vagina's low-hanging fruit, easy to grab. So, yes, I am the founder of what is the world's first bricks and mortar museum about the gynecological anatomy. The vagina, the vulva, the clitoris, the whole kit and caboodle. And it's been really great so far. We've opened our first exhibition in November. It's called, you'll like this, Muff Busters, Vagina Myths and How to Fight Them. I got like one pun fan. Love it. But what's really, so most people are really supportive, but we do get a little bit of backlash, and people who say that, it's a bit inappropriate. And I thought I would tell you about those people, since we are going to wrestle some ethical dilemmas. For example, something that people really hate is when we send them press releases. So these are real tweets by real journalists who are saying that there is not a shred of decency and propriety left in the world. Oh no, I know. I mean, of all the things that they could complain about, Vagina Museums is really what's got them going. Also, okay, you're gonna cry at this one and laugh, I hope, I don't know. This is a real email I got sent about somebody who heard about this museum, in inverted commas, and we are sick. We are absolutely sick. What a tragedy has befallen the once great country of England, as progressive policies, political correctness, virtue signaling SJWs, and unfettered third world immigration has almost destroyed it. What is it? I mean, I am a second-generation immigrant, but maybe from the second world, yes, I know, it's sad. This person apparently prays for Brexit, but they also pray for the survival of England, and I'm not sure how those two connect. I have even, and I'm showing you the worst of the worst, I have even been listed on this website. Please don't search it, because I don't want them for the clicks. Judas Watch. This is a real website, and I have a listing on it. Judas Watch describes itself as a strictly fact-based database that documents anti-white and anti-Western activities. And apparently the Vagina Museum is that. I'm not sure. The only thing I'm really sad about, to be honest, is the fact that they classed me as low influence. Like, come on, guys. I don't know. It's not just me, people think vaginas are inappropriate all over the world, all the time. A very famous case of this was in 2012. I don't know if anyone recognizes this, but this is an art piece. This woman is called Megumi Togarashi, or her artist name is Rokudena Shiko. She's a Japanese artist, and she made a vulva canoe. She 3D scanned her vulva and turned it into a canoe, and then she used it to go down the rivers in Japan. For which she was promptly arrested. She was genuinely arrested by the Japanese authorities. It took her 2 years to fight the case of indecency. The funny thing is this incident actually led her to marrying one of the water boys, and she now lives in Dublin, if anybody knows the water boys, because he read about this case in the paper, and he looked at a picture of this woman, and he was like, I'm going to marry her. Genuinely. They invited the Tokyo police to their wedding. But I think they declined. Yes. And vulvas have been massively stigmatized, from the sleeping nude, got to cover it up. And people often ask me, where did this stigma come from? A lot of people think it's got to do with that guy, Black Jeebus. I did him as the most historically accurate image I could find. They talk about the Adam and Eve and covering of their shame. But the thing is that Christianity, especially medieval Christianity, maybe not modern Christianity so much, was actually very pro-vulva. For example, that's Jesus. You see that one on the right? That is Jesus. You see this thing on the left? What do you think that is? It's not a vulva, it is the holy wound. It's the cut he gets here. And there was examples of these all over their books, and people used to pay reverence to them by kissing it and rubbing it. Yes, very. Oh, yes, I love Jesus, married to Jesus. They even put vulvas on their churches. I don't know if anyone recognized these, but these are Sheila Nagigs. In a period of medieval church building, they would put these figures on their churches, holding open their vulvas. And no one really knows why, which is really interesting. They say it's to deflect bad spirits. I don't know. And they even wore these. These are badges. So if you were a medieval Christian, one of the things you would like to do is you would go on pilgrimages. You would go to places of importance. You would go to Jerusalem. And now here's the logic, right, is at the end of a pilgrimage, you get forgiven of all your sins. So what's the logical thing to do on the way? Do all the sinning you can. So they would wear these, people think, to signify that they were up for some sinning. That's why she's wearing a crown, astride a horse. She's got a longbow. She's living her best life. And this is true for all over the world, that vulvas were used in this really positive way. This idea that vulvas are disgusting and shameful is not something that's universal. This, for example, is a door lintel from a Maori household. It would sit above a door to a chieftain's house, and you see this person in the middle. They've got this fierce face, and between their legs, another fierce face. And that vulva would cleanse you of the taboo, so all the bad things, and make you knower, so it would make you spiritually clean to enter that person's house. And even in the Middle East, in the oldest societies we have, places like Sumeria, Babylon, there was this goddess called Ishtar. What I really love about these particular ones is you see the one on the left, right? So they were drawing her vulva, and look at the care into her vulva. And then they stepped back and they looked, oh shit, we forgot to do the boobs. And then just very crudely sort of, oh God, do the boobs. And the reason why I love Ishtar so much is she is like the epitome of wonderful vulvariness. There is a story about how she was once walking around the steppe and she she leaned against the apple tree, and it really goes like this. The woman looked down, and her vulva was wondrous to behold. And at the sight of her wondrous vulva, the young woman Ishtar applauded herself. And I just love that image of this woman like 8,000 years ago just being like, and then the next part of the story is she goes around to all the people she knows and she's like, have you seen this? She is my hero. I think that the thing that's really scary about vulvas, I think the thing that people find most scary and why it's so shamed, is because vulvas are powerful. You know, this is an extremely controversial photograph. They had, there was a maternity ward that had this on their walls, and they covered up the bit of the child being born, and so you could just see her happy face, which is like a weird thing to do in a maternity ward. Like, that's happening all around you. But it's just they couldn't get over the idea of like someone having so much power over their body, so much control. And so that's kind of why I'm making a Vagina Museum. The museum started in the most millennial way you could ever imagine, in that I tweeted about it. It literally started with a tweet when I discovered there is a penis museum in Iceland. There's no vagina equivalent anywhere in the world. So I just decided to make one, basically. And we did pop-ups. This is us at a music festival. And now we're opening in Camden Market. We have, like I said, our first exhibition. It is on until the end of March, so you should come visit. It's completely free to enter. I'll skip over a few of the slides because I shared some of the feedback that we have. So I'll just go to the last. Yeah, I know, look, this one. What the fuck? It's one of my favorite ones. A doctor who never got taught the stuff that we teach in their own university. Really makes you despair. I know. But people ask us, why do we have the Vagina Museum? And I could answer in 100 different ways, but I will answer with this one. Somebody wrote us, "Hi, I'm 11, and I came here today with my auntie. I feel like you never really get taught about things like this at school or anywhere, really. Girl power!" And thank you. And I mean, that's why we have the Vagina Museum, is because people are searching for a place where we can return to a time in which vulvas were applauded. Thank you very much.
Lauren Schechter, ladies and gentlemen. Amazing. Amazing. Trying to get her. All right. I'm trying to get her to, because I've written not only am I multi-talented, I've written a book which is out on Thursday, so you can't buy it yet, but on Thursday. But it's called The Unstoppable Letty Peg. And why I'm bringing this up now, not only is it proper feminist, but it's also all about children's vagina. No, it's not. I just wanted the horror in your faces going, no, you can't possibly. It's set in Edwardian times. They didn't have any then. That is, I'm just going to put that there, though. And why I'm mentioning it now is because in that book, it talks about all of the radical feminist suffragette protests that went around in 1910. The most famous one being Black Friday. Correct. Look at you, all up in your knowing everything. Yeah, Black Friday was a really horrific protest where the suffragettes were pretty much, because Winston Churchill didn't want them to be arrested, right? He was just like, no, don't arrest them, because all they do is lock themselves up and starve themselves, and all the press like that, so don't do that. Just chuck them back. So the poor police, for about 6 hours, were literally picking women up and chucking them. And if you know anything about the suffragettes, they were bloody stubborn, right? So they just walked back into the fists and it was terrible. One lady, Mrs. Billinghurst, got she was paralysed, and she was in this sort of tricycle wheelchair. And they turfed her out of it, and men stomped on her because they were lovely like that. Anyway, so if you want to read more about that to your kids, it's a fun book. She learns jiu-jitsu from Edith Garrod, who was I'm just doing this for the look at you, just go, it's not very ethical doing product placement. It's really quite bad. But it's to do with being ethical, and it's to do with being rebellious, and it's to do with being radical. And for one man who's your next person, this is where I'm linking it in, you like this, right? He's written a book called Radical Footprints, right, or Rebel Footprints, and he is a radical tour guide, okay? So to find out more, because we're in London, it is full of radical things that have always happened for the right reasons, like suffragettes accidentally setting themselves alight while they tried to deliver the post. It's true, they were very sweet. So your next amazing speaker is fantastic, radical tour guide. It is David Rosenberg. And watch him scurry along, Keep the applause going, You up there as well. Here he comes, he's got to get up the stage. It's like a little mini blooming, here he is, David Rosenberg.
Right. And I think there should be a slide coming up there. Right. Yes. Is there a slide? Oh, what are the... Oh, is it on... So how... I don't know what to do here. Well, spacebar. Is it that one? Yeah? Oh, that's one, yeah. Well, okay. Okay, so I guess this is now for something completely different, because I'm going to be talking about some ethical questions for anti-racists. A few questions. Are all forms of racism the same, to be condemned equally? Should we treat all expressions of racism as being of the same magnitude? How important is it to differentiate between state racism and racism that reflects individual prejudice? Do the direct targets of racism have a unique or overriding right to define the racism that they experience, or can anyone pronounce on it? If that right does belong to the targeted group, whose voice within it should count as authoritative? And what if victims of racism are themselves racist against other groups? Now, I mean, I've been trying to navigate ethical questions like this for some time. As a teenager, I got involved in the anti-fascist movement. In my mid-20s to early 30s, I was working professionally in the field of anti-racism. In more recent years, I've been helping to lead educational visits to Auschwitz for diverse groups of trade unionists and younger anti-racist activists. But in the last 4.5 years, I've also faced those kind of questions as a secular Jewish Labour Party member who acknowledges some instances of anti-Semitism among Labour members, but completely rejects the claim that Labour is institutionally racist or is engulfed in a crisis of anti-Semitism, as the mainstream media was telling us almost daily in the run-up to the general election. Before answering those kind of questions that I put, I would add that I believe that British society does have a crisis of racism, and also that anti-Semitism is historically deeply embedded in British culture, and it still surfaces frequently. It exists within all mainstream British political parties. Although racist incidents, including anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-black racism, anti-Roma prejudice in the Conservative Party far outstrip Labour's, and anti-Semitism continues to flourish among fringe far-right groups. Last weekend, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, described the anti-Semitism that he suffered from fellow Conservative members. One said to him, "If I had my way, Berkoff, people like you wouldn't be allowed in this place." Bercow replied, "When you say people like me, do you mean lower class or Jewish?" To which he replied, "Both." And Bercow also added that in 22 years in Parliament, he'd never heard a word of anti-Semitism from any Labour MP, and certainly not from Jeremy Corbyn. Every form of racism merits equal condemnation. All racism, share negative, stereotyped, deterministic, dehumanizing views of their targets. Most racist comments punch those they consider below them, but some punch upwards at those they stereotype as powerful, controlling forces. Conspiracy theories alleging hidden power and control are reserved largely for Jews, although conspiracy theories are now starting to emerge about Muslims too. There are differences in magnitude. Jewish people, especially ultra-Orthodox Jews, mainly in London and Manchester, experience threats, abuse, harassment, and physical violence. And each year, it seems, the numbers are rising. But a far greater number of attacks are experienced by Muslim communities and refugee communities. That is not to trivialize one community's suffering, but to build more connected responses between our communities. And yet those who call themselves the leaders of the Jewish community seem very keen to separate anti-Semitism from other forms of racism and to distance themselves, especially from minorities alleging state racism. And the right-wing media play along, giving massively more attention to allegations of anti-Semitism than to attacks on other communities. And that generates resentments. It does not help Jews, and it doesn't help the real fight against racism that includes anti-Semitism. But I've also had arguments with some anti-racists who separate anti-Semitism off from the racism experienced by blacks and Muslims. And they say that tackling state racism is paramount. I've been told that many more people were killed during slavery than in the Nazi Holocaust. Now, I don't do the Oppression Olympics. If 3 million Jews had been killed by the Nazis instead of 6 million, that would not have made it any better. The issue in both cases is understanding the particularities and significance of why and how the lives of so many were tragically cut short. Regarding state racism, it's outrageous that at the height of the revelations about the Windrush scandal, which devastated the lives of long-settled Caribbean families, deprived people of their livelihood and rights, and deported some to destitution and early death, there were far more headlines about allegations of anti-Semitic incidents, which were mainly about contested social media posts, and that could not compare to the devastation of Windrush families. But it can also be a false dichotomy. The hard-right government we recently elected will undoubtedly strengthen state racism, but it will simultaneously embolden fringe fascist groups who still put anti-Semitism and the Jewish conspiracy theory claims right at the center of their ideology. But the biggest controversy over anti-Semitism today is over who gets to define it. I do not believe that the targeted group has a sole right to define the racism they experience, although outsiders who wade in do have a responsibility to educate themselves about the nature, about the history, about the nuances of the racism they're defining. Those definitions have been very bitterly contested within the Jewish community, not least because those who the media treat as spokespersons for the Jewish population often conflate negative attitudes to Jews with legitimate criticism of Israel and of Zionism. Who are these spokespeople? I'll tell you some of them. The Board of Deputies, whose elected members mainly represent Orthodox synagogues, chosen in largely uncontested elections. They meet monthly, but mainly to rubber stamp decisions taken by the board's unelected paid officers. Some secular communal organisations are represented, but the board has no mandate to speak for the large numbers of secular Jews in Britain. Its authority is rejected too, actually, by most ultra-Orthodox Jews, who include many non-Zionists and anti-Zionists. There's a body called the Jewish Leadership Council that gets quoted in the press, and they're an amalgam of businessmen and leaders of communal organisations that have never been elected. They just announced themselves about 15 years ago. the chief rabbi, Ephraim Mervish, and who controversially intervened in the general election. There's some newspaper reports up there. 2 weeks before the general election, he published a lot of stuff against Labour. And he is the chief rabbi only of what is called the United Synagogue, with the allegiance of about 20% of the entire Jewish population of secular and religious Jews, and again, entirely unelected. In the 1970s, he spent 3 years at a seminary on an illegal settlement in the West Bank. And that may have been something, okay, he was in his late teens at the time. But in 2014, there was a fundraising dinner for that seminary, annual fundraising dinner in New York, and he was the keynote speaker. And finally, among the groups I'm telling you about, there is one calling itself Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, also unelected. And that created itself in 2014 when the Gaza war was raging, and support for Palestinians was rising in the general population in street protests. And the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism doesn't so much target anti-Semitism, it targets people, non-Jewish and Jewish, who strongly criticize Israel and Zionism. And it's been attacked itself as anti-Palestinian and Islamophobic. It also targets some fringe fascist groups. But these different bodies overlap in conflating anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and attempting to delegitimize dissenting Jewish voices. But dissenting Jewish voices, and I'm just one of them, are growing. And many of them, and many of us, actually have much longer and deeper involvement in anti-racist and anti-fascist work than the people the media treats as the spokespersons for our community. Many Labour members have expressed a feeling that the efforts by bodies like the Board of Deputies to keep allegations of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party in the headlines contributed to Labour's defeat. And that anger is compounded by the apparent interference in the leadership and deputy leadership elections contests that are going on at the moment. The Board of Deputies asked people to sign up, candidates, to sign up to 10 pledges. To their credit, Dawn Butler and Richard Bergen refused. Vitriol was heaped on them. But I was very heartened by Richard Bergen's rationale. He says that he wants to speak to the Board of Deputies, but he also wants to speak to the plurality of Jewish voices. He voiced concerns about the minorities within minorities. And this really pinpoints an issue that is so important for all communities experiencing racism, whether they're Muslim, Jewish, Black, Roma, refugee. It is the racists who homogenize and stereotype communities. And if we defend the rights of minorities, we must also listen to and fight for the rights of the minorities within the minorities. Thank you.
Amazing. David Rosenberg there. Fantastic. It's very weird because I don't come from a Jewish background at all, but I work obviously in show business with Jewish people, and this is 2014, exactly when that horrible stuff was happening in Gaza, and I was up in Newcastle, and I was up there with my friend Bennett Aaron, who's an amazing comedian. He's Welsh, he's Jewish, he makes jokes about it as well, and all he said in front of the audience, and the audience was loving it. It was a lovely comedy night. He was closing, I was opening, and so crowd were lovely to me, lovely to the MC, and then Bennett goes on and he's storming it. He's having a lovely time, everybody's slapping their legs, and he just mentions halfway through his set that he's Jewish. And in this really sort of liberal comedy club off Big Market in Newcastle, the audience went, oh. And it was palpable. It was so odd because these were rational, lovely people who were rational and lovely and weren't. It's really weird, the sort of little, things in our heads that sort of go, oh my goodness, everybody is a little bit racist. And you look inside yourself and realise that too. Because, we all are in our own little ways. Weirdly, I'm half my family's Muslim in a very sort of weird mix. I've got 4 parents, it's complicated, right? the biggest argument we had was my Auntie Khadijah had bought for her little girl, she bought her a bear, and the little girl had called this bear Mohammed, which, it's her, which... It was really, like, half my family were fine with it. My Uncle Ali goes absolutely mad and starts saying, no, no, no. And eventually we all came together because we all realised that, with a name like Mohammed, this little bear would be the first to have his hamper searched at the annual picnic. And it was a tough time. So we've got yet more speakers. Now your next speaker, she's got more credits than she's amazing. Okay, so I think she's the founder of People Tree and of Real, and she's an author, and she's a social entrepreneur. Her name is Safia Minney. So will you please go wild and crazy and welcome her to the stage? Here she comes. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. Run, run, run.
Good evening, everyone. My presentation is going to be visual and spoken, and it's partly visual because I'm only 5'2", and if I'm close to the podium, you don't get to see me anyway. So I just want to share with you my ethical journey, which started when I was 17 years old in publishing and wanted to spend every penny I possibly could on things that were part of the solution and not part of the problem. I, after publishing and advertising and starting a social marketing agency, I went to Japan. And in Japan, I tried to do what every ethical consumer was doing in the early 90s, which was to try and find fair trade produce. Those of you who are old enough might remember the delicious fair trade Nicaraguan coffee, but not terribly good if you ever found it fair trade fashion. Well, I was in Japan, and the point was that there was very little awareness of fair trade, the need for it. Most people who worked would work on a Saturday and barely saw their children, so when you started to talk about exploitation, there was very little understanding of it. So what we had to do is we really had to talk about the incredible craftsmanship, the incredible skills. We had to produce beautifully designed product, things that people really wanted. It wasn't going to get a sympathy vote, and that's how we started People Tree. Really it was very much linking human rights with environmental justice. So this is a picture of me in the field. We were the first company to get the Global Organic Textiles Standard, that Soil Association, on the organic supply chain that took organic cotton all the way from the field through the ginneries, the production of the fabric, and then onto the tailors' workbenches. And these were all through fair trade. And part of this was because we realised that we had to start doing trade differently. Trade could be used as a tool for good, and sadly, conventional trade was doing absolutely the opposite. It was putting profit above people and the planet. And I decided that we started supply chains both in fair trade and organic foods, but also in fashion, because we wanted to concentrate on how we could prove that a fair trade and sustainable fashion model could work. Now, this is 28 years ago, and journalists would come up to me and say, well, why are you making an organic cotton dress? You don't eat it. That's daft, And we would explain that this was better for the farmers. It paid them more. It supported indigenous seed banks. It meant that they could invest in the fertility of the soil and really support the other rotational crops that they were producing. And this led me on to really beginning to understand and unpicking just how incredibly polluting the garment industry is. So I'd like to just kind of move on through that journey. So really, the start of building People Tree was very much to go and visit the workers in the slums, also in the garment factories, to understand what fair trade fashion should be fairer than, and understand that link with the economically marginalised people, farmers and artisans in the so-called majority world, and their link to the environment, and how by protecting and producing products that really protected the environment, we could also support the environment locally. So the organic cotton really was very much to support farmers with that premium, but also to support their ecosystem. And paying a fair price meant that they were receiving premiums of about 30% more. But it was a very unconventional way of doing trade, because what we were doing is we were linking the artisans and the producers with the customers. We were bringing them to Tokyo, but we were also taking the buyers to actually meet the producers in Bangladesh and India and in Kenya. And to use craft skill as a way of really generating livelihoods in some of the most economically marginalized villages in the developing world. Many of you will recognize Emma Watson. She came to me when she was 19 and said it would be fantastic to make a fair trade and sustainable fashion collection that really spoke to her generation. And we made 3 collections together, and at the same time, we created some really fantastic media stories and magazines and some short films to start talking about why ethical fashion, sustainable fashion, fair trade fashion was the way that the industry needed to go. And that has brought us onto this campaign. My most recent book was called Slave to Fashion, which looks at modern-day slavery, not only in the fashion industry, but also caught up in industries that surround fashion. So looking at child labour, forced labour, excessive overtime, and human trafficking, and how that feeds into the fashion industry as we know and we buy it in the high street. So obviously, you know, when you're doing this work, journalists would ask me, well, is it important that it's supporting 5,000 people and their families, or is it creating a different model, a model that proves that fashion could be done differently? And I think more and more, over the 5 or 10 years at the beginning of that journey, what became clear was that it was about showing that a different way of doing business is possible. Working in natural materials felt a completely intuitive thing to do. But of course now, we know that 83% of our water is full of 1 to 5 millimeter microfibers, and that when you wash a garment that's made of synthetic or which is now more than 80% of the types of fiber that we use, we're washing these into our waterways. Oops. Sorry.
The concept of people tree is to use fashion as a tool.
This is a short video of working with natural fibres in fair trade communities.
Farmers and fair trade groups, and there were 2 things that were central to choosing the right kinds of people to work with. One was that they put women's rights central to what they do, and the second was they really take seriously sustainability and the environment. We pioneered the standards in fair trade and organic cotton and fair trade manufactured clothing through our fair trade organisation, and that really helped us build a huge amount of dedication. I think as a creator, what's always inspired me have been the stories of people, the craftsmanship, and the possibility of using trade to empower people to lift them out of poverty and to do business completely differently. When you go around the developing world, you just see the most awful worker exploitation. What I wanted to do was to capture what modern-day slavery, the worst of the fashion industry, is, and that's what I've tried to do in Slave to Fashion.
Sorry, that was a bit loud, wasn't it? I think with last year, 2019, really being that watershed, when everyone started to talk about the climate crisis in no uncertain terms, we saw Stockholm Fashion Week cancelled, and we saw Extinction Rebellion also call for the cancellation of London Fashion Week to really rethink fashion. We saw luxury fashion brands starting to really talk about how to go net zero within their supply chains. So we've had a huge movement towards the share economy to really begin to understand how we reduce the greenhouse gases and CO2 emissions. At the moment, the fashion industry is responsible for between 7 and 8% of the total global carbon emissions, and that's set to increase to 25% by 2050, which is totally impossible. So again, fashion companies and business are not only looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, those 17 that you're probably quite familiar with, but also what I've been excited about, which is this emergence of a kind of 18th, which is about activism. It's about consumers and citizens and shareholders and the media and business really pushing for a different way of doing business and trade, and putting climate absolutely central to the financial systems and to all the new economic systems, or creating the new economic systems that we so need. And we're beginning to see, you know, with donut economics, Kate Raworth's fantastic book, with the documentary, you've probably seen Apocalypse Cow by George Monbiot, Rob Hopkins' fantastic book, What If, that there are different ways of moving through this transition, that we can all be part of the change. I think one thing for me was just, you know, when the Kardashians finally admit that, you know, having 5 fridges is probably not a good idea, and that we have a climate emergency, things really start to change. I'm going to zip through here because I think I'm over time. I was part of a group of business people that put together something called Business Declares a Climate and Ecological Emergency, and this is really galvanizing business in the same way that you now have XR doctors and XR lawyers and XR teachers and nurses. And I think the excitement is that finally, after 30 years, we're having discussions about the dysfunction of capitalism. And within this space, we have this incredible dynamism and this incredible move to reinvent everything, and to reinvent it now. So I'm very excited to be part of this discussion tonight about Conway Hall and how we raise money for it, because I'm so excited to be part of it, and have run have run some events here before. I recently set up something called Real, which is looking at how we transition in our living and leadership to creating the regeneration in terms of society and business. So if you'd like to have a look at that on Twitter or on the web, online, please do have a look. It covers different topics from activism all the way through to fashion and beauty and well-being. So I'm going to leave it there, and actually, there's a wonderful 1-minute video I'd love to show you if I can.
You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you're stealing their future in front of their very eyes. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. Many people say that doesn't matter what we do, but I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity for a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. We have not come here to beg you to care. You have ignored us in the past, and you will ignore us again. You have run out of excuses, and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not.
They're only kids, so I reckon we can take them in a bit of a fight. There we go. So up next we have fantastic, amazing poets extraordinaire, musician extraordinaire, every woman's dream. Okay, maybe just mine and a few other people. He is an absolute hero of mine, so I want you to be on your best behaviour. I want you, if he chooses to be silly, to giggle like crazy. I want you, if he chooses to be serious and extend some of his poetry, to weep beautifully, just a single tear. Be the best audience. Stop smashing things in the front row. I want your attention, and I want it now. Give it up. Massive round of applause for Mr. John Hegley.
Thank you very much. I said to my friend Celia that I was going to come and do a talk on ethics, and she said, Essex? And I said, yeah, Essex. So I'm going to talk about Essex tonight. Colchester Arts Centre in Essex. They have a system whereby they subsidise their jazz evenings from the comedy and the pop group evenings, and when I was doing my working out what I was going to say, I put this in my proposal. There might be those who question pop and comedy tickets providing such subsidy, but one can answer that all will benefit from the jazz addicts not only being kept off the streets, but also being provided with gainful activity, which will make them happier citizens, which will benefit us all. Along those lines, more seriously, I suppose, when I was touring last year, somebody who worked in a prison in the northeast said to me that she was depressed about young men having not being taken in any way in a better direction, learning something in the prison that will make them better citizens. And I do poetry workshops, and this is a poem that I wrote about that. It's called An Ending of the Reoffending. For the prisoner paying the price, just a punishment may not suffice. The best use of time may be learning to rhyme, making sure that it isn't too nice a process. Of course, you don't want people thinking a life of crime leads to loads of free poetry workshops. Yeah? So this is one of my dad's paintings. My father was half French, the bottom half. But when I go into schools, because I am part French, it's difficult to know which bit, but I am a bit French. And when I go into schools, I share that. I say that I'm a bit French, and it means kids tend to open out with bits of themselves that they tend to not necessarily want to share. They want to fit in. Dad wanted to fit in Dad's name. Dad was baptised René Robert. In England, he was known as Bob. Tough crowd. Okay. So, this is, I started out, when I first used to come down here in the 80s, I used to sing, I sing with the Popticians, and we sang songs about glasses, and this is a poem that summarises my philosophy, called Glass is Good, Contact Lenses Bad. In the embrace of my glasses, I openly accept my vulnerability and affirm my acceptance of outside help. As well as providing open acknowledgement of the imperfection in my eyesight, my glasses are a symbolic celebration of the wider imperfection that is the human condition. In contrast, contact lenses are a hiding of the fault. They pretend the self-sufficiency of the individual and minister unto the cult of stultifying normality. They are that which should be cast out of your vision. They're a denial of the self, they're a denial of the other, they're a betrayal of humanity. I think that covers it. Okay, interpersonal ethics. This is called Being is Believing. I believe in you being close to me, I believe in you being close to me intimately, I believe in you being close to me intimately regularly. I believe in you being close to me intimately regularly, not just not today. I believe in you being close to me intimately regularly, just not today, because sometimes I need to be with myself alone, all the better to be with you more intimately. Yeah. So this is a lean towards the light, and I suppose this is on the sort of really on the subject. This is really. Mr. William Wordsworth won't take sugar in his porridge, he takes honey. It's not to do with the money or the flavour as much as the moral objection to the method of production. Mr. William Wordsworth measures out his conscience with his spoon. In the face of what is taking place, the boon of Mr. Wordsworth's gesture may seem slight, but it's a lean towards the light. When I put my recycling out, I know my contribution's not equivalent of the manning of the barricades in 1930s Spain, but again, it's a lean towards the light. A step in the direction that seems right. Like a monocotyledon that's broken through the surface, starting its existence as a blade of grass or daffodil, the move that's phototropic might be only microscopic, but it's a lean, instinctive in the little beam. It's a lean towards the light. Somebody who doesn't believe in that sort of philosophy. This is a piece about my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law is the kind of chap who likes to stop and ask hitchhikers where they're going and then tell them he'll get there first. So we're going to divide you into two sections. First of all, my people, the blessed, the sacred, the glasses wearers. First group, second group, those non-wearers of glasses. So that's those who don't need glasses, those who need glasses but have betrayed their glasses. The contact lens wearers, what I call the enemy within. And then those who've had the operation, what I call the laser gazers. You are all in the second group. The first group, those, the blessed, the sacred, the bright shiners, my people. I can see you out there. Listen. Listening through your eyes. So the song is called Private. My brother-in-law in private kind of going. I say private, then it's, so you follow with your privates. So I say, and then it's first of all glasses wearers and the rest of you. Private! Okay, focus. Come on. There's a notice in my bride that says private. Private. Okay, if you're struggling with this, let those who've understood. I like to think of this as testimony to mixed ability teaching. I say private, then the glasses wearers say private, then the rest of you, okay? Here we go. There's a notice in my bride, it says private. Private! Private! That's the way to stay alive in private. Private! Private! Don't look into me windows, don't look into me eyes. I'm not a public enterprise. I don't hold hands or give my heart. I am one big private. Private! Private! Heart.
Yes, like, literally, I know I dress the way I do, and it has, I look like a 1980s lesbian that's fucked a Thundercat, I know, right? But the glasses add to it in such a way. I went to a Halloween party after a gig not wearing a costume, and I won Best Costume. And they gave me a little certificate. They went all the way, little certificate, and on it said, she came as the ghost of Sue Perkins. Trust you guys to be bake-off people. Right. Now, your next speaker came here, literally, we have to be extra nice to her because she, booked last minute and absolutely fantastic. So she is a lawyer, she is a political activist, and I'm going to get her name right. I've been singing it instead of but now all I can think is private. Exactly. So her name is Dr. Shola. Right, here we go. Mos-Shogbamimu. Boom. Yes, I love it. Here she is. Welcome and go crazy. Thank you.
Well, hello. How are you all doing? Are you feeling quite private? I was joining you there at the back. And you know what? I tried to make my name as fun as possible for people, because for me it's fun. Sometimes I go, say my name, say Mos-Shogbamimu, Shola's around you. Listen, see? You're not gonna forget my name now, are you? And the thing you have to understand about saying African names is that you have to say it with the right attitude, people, okay? Because African names have power, personality, and character, just like its owner. I'm just saying. All right, people. I've been listening to what my comrades have been saying, and I've felt really lifted by them. And I would like to talk to you about something that we've all been experiencing this last few weeks around privilege, and what white privilege is, and what we do around the issue of racism, right? I know it's such a difficult conversation to have. The moment you mention racism, people go, yeah, okay, somebody wants to make me feel guilty. Actually, no, we just want to have a real conversation, a way to bridge the gap, a way we can come together and be more inclusive. Does that make sense to you? Does it make sense? Right? It's not about pointing fingers, and if fingers are pointed, then take it, It doesn't matter, don't worry about it, but let's learn from it, right? So recently, through the whole Harry and Meghan saga, right, and everybody having an opinion on every single thing this couple does, I've been sharing some of my views, just like you all, right? And when I shared the view about how, because of white privilege, some people can't see racism the way we see it, black people and ethnic minorities. Now, that seemed to have struck a very not so nice chord with some people, because then I say, I've been called anti-white. But I love white people. I'm not anti-white. I'm just anti-racist. There's a difference, right? And then I've been called woke. You know what? I'm even past understanding what the heck woke means nowadays. And I've also been called left. This right, left centuries, it's all lost meaning. The point of the matter is, we live in a society today, in the 21st century, 2020, when things ought to get better for all of us. And the way we do that is for all of us to start to understand the different levels of power that we hold in society. People go, oh, well, since black is a new diversity, you've got new power. I'm like, right, how does that work? And of course, I've also heard people who go, well, I can't be privileged as a white person because I'm working class, or I grew up in a council flat. And I'm like, okay, you need to first of all understand that privilege does not mean class or wealth. Privilege simply means advantage. It's a word it's an adjective you can use at the back of something else. So when we talk about white privilege, we talk about the fact that if you, lovely lady, and I walk into a store, right, 99% of the time it will probably be me that the shop assistant will follow. Not because it's written on our foreheads what our class is or our education or what we can afford or we can't afford, but it just seems to be the society we live in, right? That suspicion. It's something white people will never experience the way we do. Or police brutality is something white folks will never experience the way we do. So it's about having real conversations. Does that make sense to everybody? Having real conversations, because that's the way we can bridge the gap. And it's not about making somebody feel guilty. And let me not lie, I have no problem having uncomfortable conversations. If it makes you uncomfortable, good, because imagine how we feel, okay? But it's about having real conversations where we can all talk about what we are learning from each other. And we can grow from that. You know, people talk about diversity, and we talk about inclusion. Diversity has now become such a tick box exercise, you don't even know what to look for anymore, which is why, of course, the BAFTAs had no diversity whatsoever, and the Oscars have no diversity whatsoever, because they seem to have forgotten an important point. Diversity must be intentional. Right? It would be great for all of us to wake up one morning and go, I got it, right? I know exactly what to do. But the reality is, because of the way we live our lives and because our experiences are different, you are not going to see certain things I see, and I might not see certain things you see, which is why it's so great to have more friends that don't look like you. So I usually say to some of my close friends, I'm like, look, if you're white and you don't have enough black friends or brown friends, go make some. It's not that difficult, okay? And if you're black, brown, and you don't have enough white friends, go make some. I mean, and it's not about, okay, you know what, let's just have a conversation. How do I broach this person to have a conversation? It can't be that difficult. I mean, do you like football? I bet you that people from all races love football, maybe except me, because I just don't get that kicking the ball and giving everybody a headache. Or do you like Formula One, right? My husband loves Formula One. I can't stand it. I mean, why would grown men be going around in a car like mosquitoes chasing each other? It makes no sense. So usually what I do is I'm there at the beginning going, oh, wonderful, wonderful. Fall asleep in the middle, and at the end I'm like, wonderful, Hamilton. But you know what I mean? There's always something that we can all of us find as common ground. I'll tell you what my common ground is. Food. You see, food and I have a very special relationship. My father, God bless his soul, he passed away a number of years ago now. He told me that when I was about 6 or 7, that I led my classmates to lock our headmistress in her office. I'm like, I would never do something like that. He said, you all locked her in and you demanded for more food. I'm like, So it started from a young age, I understand. Because apparently we weren't given enough food, and I had locked her in the office. I'm like, I can't imagine how my very Nigerian parents would have reacted to that. I actually know. I know that they would have gone, that's very bad, Shola, you shouldn't do things like that. And then they would have laughed their heads off once they left everything. That's my child right there. But the point is, we all have common grounds, things that get us connected, right? And things that should make us more comfortable about asking questions that you may not necessarily feel comfortable asking somebody else. And I want to feel comfortable with everybody else, right? And I'm sure you want to feel comfortable with me, right? So I would always say to you, because I've had some people ask me this, that, you know, can I ask this question of, you know, a black person? I'm like, well, what question is that? It depends on the question and who are you asking, right? I think you can ask any question you want to ask. How else are we all going to grow, right? That just makes good sense to me. And in a society where language, there's no war on language, but we need to be careful about the language we use, and we need to understand why some language is more offensive than the other. How else are you going to know but to ask? So rather than be defensive about it, ask the question. You can only be safer that way. And if you don't know, do what I do. Like with my kids now, I have 3 girls, 13, 10, and 7. You have no idea how much I learned from these girls. I learned language that I never heard in my entire life. I mean, my 7-year-old was saying to me the other day, Mommy, look at me, I'm so beautiful. I said, I know I sent you to a good school. Is it beautiful or beautiful? It's beautiful, Mommy. You need to say, and even the way she was giving me the attitude that she was saying, I was like, I'm clearly old. But the point is, you can learn from everybody. So when we talk about this issue of how race is interrelated, how we can grow together, I would say, look, everybody, it's our responsibility to be as diverse as possible. Don't let your diversity or privilege, hold you in one box. Don't leave it to your employers to be diverse, because the only person that can be diverse is us, quite frankly. Because corporations pay lawyers like me to draft incredibly beautiful language about diversity policies, ironclad, policies. And it makes no sense at the end of the day because no one can follow it. It doesn't really match the reality. The only way we can truly start to understand each other is if we bring each of ourselves. We are true to ourselves, and we express ourselves, not in an offensive manner, but in a way that people can bridge the gap. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes? So we can celebrate each other. One of the ways I get diverse is by what I watch. I don't know if any of you have watched this Turkish drama on Netflix called Ertuğrul. Have you heard of it? Father in heaven. Aside from the fact that the actors, God took his time in making them, the point is, brilliant program. I mean, it's about the father of the father of the founder of the Ottoman Empire. Just brilliant. I mean, they're speaking Turkish. By the time I finished season 1 and season 2, Netflix at the time didn't have all the other seasons. This is me on Twitter going, help, oh my God, I need to watch Ertuğrul. I'm watching this thing in subtitles, but I'm picking up Turkish language as I go along, right? It's beautiful. I'm loving it. I'm enthralled by it. I start to make friends on Twitter who go, Shola, don't worry. Why did you go here, go there? This is me watching season 3, season 4. I do not know how I got any work done. I mean, my kids might be shouting, Mommy. I'm like, is there blood? You'll survive. Mommy's watching Ertuğrul. Don't disturb me. But I say to you, let's celebrate our common grounds. Let's celebrate our differences. Let's find a way to bridge the gap, even with the things we struggle with, because I know we all come with our strong opinions and our different bias and all of that. But we can find a way to overcome it. And the way we can do that is by having a real conversation and not being afraid to make friends and asking questions. And if you think your question is going to be tricky, try Google first. Google is not going to bite your head off. Does that make sense? All right, people, have a great evening.
Dr. Shola, there we are. So, you're going that way, cool. Right, now. I know that a lot of you are thinking, I thought this was a gala event. We're missing something, and it's not the twirling, right? We were missing something, and that is, of course, awards. Correct response. We did say Panto, up at the top. I'm expecting more from you. Just because you feel separated and superior doesn't mean you are. Ethically, in fact, you're in the wrong for not being part of the group and down with the plebs below you. So, would you please give it up once again to present the award? It is Jim Walsh.
Thank you. Amazing speakers. I don't know how I find myself on the same platform as them. The Ethical Award. This is our inaugural gala. We had to choose someone that we felt represented all of the new ideas that have come out in the last 2 years about ethics, our values of creative, diverse, historic, human and kind. The staff team met, we had discussions, and we worked out who were the sort of front runners, who were we really wanted to go to, and the person that we have selected is here tonight, and he's going to actually give a bit of a talk as well. I'm delighted to welcome this friend of mine to the stage. She is the CEO of the Ubele Iniative. She does amazing things for social justice. She's a social justice campaigner for women and on race equality issues. Please give a huge welcome to Yvonne Field. Thank you.
Wow. Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. It's not a BAFTA.
Not about the first ever ethical award.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm Wow, okay, let me just get my breath back, okay. Okay, well, I mean, I'm absolutely delighted to accept this first Ethical Society Award. And I've been involved in working with communities for more years than I can remember. But I mean, if I'm being honest, probably it is over 40 years. And the work that Jim mentioned, I've been doing probably for about the past 10 years, which is the Ubele Iniative. Ubele is taken from Swahili, it means the future, and it's about next generation leadership and social entrepreneurship. And I'd like to just, first of all, thank my colleagues who are here with me this evening. They're in the front row and the third row. There's Michael and Aisha and Anita and Jay, and also my sister, Connie, is down there at the end. So just thank you for being with me on this journey, for supporting the work that we do. We're actually an international organisation, but we're also based in Wood Green and Brixton, so please come and see the work that we're doing there. I kind of toyed with the idea as to whether to speak or not, and my colleague said I need to say something. So actually, it's interesting when you know you're in the right place when people before you say things that resonate with you and also pick up on themes. So I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that have been touched on this evening through what I'm going to say. Can I give this to somebody, please? Okay, I'm going to talk about the Windrush scandal as it's become known. And I'm also going to talk about Jamaicans say feisty, English people say feisty woman. And that's my mother. And I've not done this before, so you'll have to bear with me if I get a bit emotional. She passed away in 2011, by the way. When I was thinking about the Windrush generation, actually, and the scandal, there is a real difference, and I want to actually kind of make the point about the difference. The Windrush scandal that's came to the fore a couple of years ago, or some of us, though, knew that this was bubbling for many, many years, is actually about a group of people that actually is my age group. And when I was kind of thinking about this, I thought, wow, actually, I'm one of 10. My sister is number 2 of the 10, and I'm number 8 of the 10, and we're all alive, thank goodness. But actually, the Windrush scandal is about those people who are my age. So my sisters, 3 of my sisters and 2 of my brothers came here in the 1960s as young people. And so the scandal has affected that group of people, and including myself, because people have died age 58, and I'm 60 next month. So these are my peers and my contemporaries. I was actually born in England. So when we talk about the scandal, we're talking about still relatively young people. But when we talk about Windrush itself, we're often referring to those people who came. In fact, we are children of Windrush. Our parents came here. My parents came here in the 50s. Early to mid-50s, and then the children came and joined them, or like myself and some of my siblings, we were born here. So I think it's really important to make that distinction between the scandal that has affected the younger generation and the Windrush people who came here on the Windrush ship, of course, but also in the early 50s. And if my parents had been alive, if our parents had been alive, they would have been in their late 90s now. Yes? So I hope that's kind of clear in terms of just trying to clarify that. I want to say something about the Windrush scandal, and then I also want to read a poem, and I've never read this poem before in public. I didn't write it. It is about my mother's life, but I think it epitomizes the contributions that the Windrush generation has made to the UK. So I hope you'll bear with me. So, just a case I wanted to mention to you about the Windrush scandal. The case of Paulette Wilson, who was 61, and she was reported in The Guardian. And one of the very first harrowing stories in this book by Amelia Gentleman called Windrush Betrayal, Exposing the Hostile Environment. Last year it was published. And Paulette, like some of my siblings, was 10 years old when she left Jamaica, and she worked in the House of Commons as a canteen worker. So she was at the heart of the establishment. And she was forcibly removed from the UK via Yarlswood Immigration Removal Centre in Bedfordshire. The authorities said that detention was necessary because there was no evidence of her lawful entry into the UK, as she'd claimed that she'd actually entered age 10. And in fact, what's really interesting is that my next door neighbour, who's 2 years older than me, she showed me the passport that she and her 4 siblings came on with her mother in the early 60s. And so, although she actually naturalised and became British, she also was a child of Windrush and could have been in the same predicament. She'd spent many years working at Hackney College. And as we know, and as has been mentioned earlier, people have been sacked, evicted from their homes, denied treatment on the NHS, prevented from visiting dying relatives because their status was seen to be non-British. And as we know, the common factor was those people came to the UK, as I've mentioned, in the 50s and 60s from Commonwealth countries, particularly the Caribbean, mostly to join their parents, as my siblings did. And those people, what came to light for me was actually those people were working in health systems, on the transport networks, they were working in car plants, they were working in rail track maintenance, they were healthcare assistants, they were traffic wardens, they are construction workers. In fact, what came to me is that they are low-paid workers. They are people who had not travelled, had not been able to afford to travel from this country when they came here as children. And they were dismissed as a group that did not matter. They were the Winstons, they were the Gladstones, they were the Nelsons, they were the Lloyds. We've got a Lloyd in my family, we don't have a Winston or a Gladstone. And all those names are remnants of colonial past. But being passportless didn't matter until 2010, when the Conservative-led coalition, as you know, created a hostile environment. And Commonwealth citizens routinely had to show that they were here legally after that environment was created. And of course, the government at the time, as it rushed to cut what was seen as stubbornly high immigration figures, they were viewed as acceptable collateral damage. And as we're talking about low-paid workers, obviously, or not maybe obviously, but their voices were were not very loud within the system. Of course, the public outcry and the ensuing scandal, so we have the Windrush scandal. There was call for amnesty for there was a call for amnesty for anyone who came here as a minor between 1948 and 1973, because the act actually took place in 1971, the Immigration Act, and actually a public apology was called for. The compensation scheme for Windrush victims is coming up to its 2nd anniversary in April, and this April coming, and of course there have been some offers of compensation which have been paltry. And of course, as I said, we've had people dying due to the stress or stranded back home. And I just want to give you a couple of examples of what's happening now, 2 years later. So there's a campaign on 38 degrees. There's a campaign and I've lost my words, and a petition, thank you, for amendments to the Windrush Bill, which is actually going to be, get its 2nd reading next week on the 10th of February. The campaign is about trying to reflect restorative justice and fairness to the victims of Windrush. And also, there's going to be another deportation flight on the 11th of February, and on the 6th of this month, there's going to be a campaign at Downing Street. So please come and support us if you're available. I'd just like to say something about my mother, and the reason why I want to mention here, because she is and was the official original Windrush generation, and she campaigned and she taught me to campaign. And actually, when I was thinking about this presentation or this evening, I was 11 in 1971, and my mother took me for an interview for a school. And when we went for the interview, the head teacher asked my mother if she was a British citizen in 1971. And she said, no, but I have a right to be here. I wasn't offered a place at that school. My white friends who actually decided to apply because they said, Yvonne, what school are you applying for? And I told them, and they actually got in and I didn't. So we waged a campaign against the local education authority and I was homeschooled for 3 months. And we took on the authority and the school system and the press picked it up, our local press, and eventually I got to school place in January 1972. But But when I think about the significance, and the penny only dropped last week, and I thought 1971, because I was perplexed as to why she would ask my mother that question at that time. But that was when the new immigration law was actually passed in 1971. Maybe there was an edict to say you must ask black parents who bring them to the school if they are British, because it was like quite a sort of, at the time, seemingly random question. But I think there were connections. So I'd just like to end by reading a poem about my mother. Her name was Mary Field. She was born in 18th of March 1921, and she passed away on the 19th of August 2011. And this poem was not written by me, it was written by a very dear colleague of mine who has enduring mental health problems. She's a wordsmith, and she took 3 obituaries that were written about my mother and wove them into this poem. So in June the year of 1956, on the Origa you did sail, to this distant land in Plymouth met your foot upon the soil. Of years to come, a land called home for your children and their own. Your innocence in eye and mind, you embraced any opportunity, though not of the indigenous. You enabled yourself with will, the backbone of the family, the thread that held together, the fabric of all we achieve. Mother, we thank you for so strong, so resilient, determined and with skill, with practical application made from an ounce, a pound in weight. Using your imagination, harnessing your attributes, with love enough for us all, for many not even kin. You instilled in your family the attributes of the upstanding individual we remember, a legacy of inspiration still with us today. At times, when not able to reason with, eventually seeing the error of our ways. Your patience, your guidance, consistent in all you did, turning your hand to all you could, the capacity to make ends meet. You cut your cloth accordingly. We were not left without. Your wisdom more meaningful than anything bequeathed monetary. Mother, what were your expectations when you came to England, so far from where you had grown? We wonder, did you feel your life fulfilled? Did you do all you had wished? Did you dare to dream the dream? There is so much that we could have asked and much that we could have said, that could have been said, had we dared to ask. Many unanswered questions, puzzles left to complete. Your legacy of your life so long, that puzzle will now complete. The hands of time did not allow, but Mother, we know you are now at rest, in peace and loved, the unbounded geographies where family now reside. Many introductions made, the family tree extended more, the true extent, though yet to achieve, the magnitude of task, the legacy, our heritage, the root, the trunk, the branch, for some the beginning, the journey just beginning, new fruit upon the tree. I'm going to just jump a bit and I'm just going to read the last bit. A consequence of the family tree now spans geographies. The family gene is domicile and of many nationalities, from origins of Jamaican soil, of labour and much love, from South African to West, Ghana and Nigeria, to as far as Japan, with more than half a century in England, establishing some roots that flourish far beyond such rich diversity within a given family, loved and treasured. You were and still are our anchor mum. Thank you.
Go on, everybody. And if some of you have already noticed and already escaping and know that the bar is open for, until 9:45. So you can go outside and mingle. Do remember, as you go outside and mingle, to think about becoming a member. Think about supporting this place. These conversations that you are hearing are not available on the BBC. You have to go to the very dark depths of the internet to find them, and there you cannot trust them. It's places like this which make these discussions important and relevant, so please do support the Conway Hall as much as you can. Please give a massive round of applause for everybody you've seen tonight. And give one for yourselves as well. I've been Iszi Lawrence. Have a fantastic rest of the year.